welcome to the show. Tonight's topic will be, I hope, not too stressful, and I hope will be interesting, because we are going to address serious events going on in the world as of late. The invasion of Israel by elements of Hamas, and what these implications are in combination with the war in Ukraine, and what this situation means for the world as we look ahead to the near future. I would like to welcome to the studio Philip Goss, otherwise known as Phil. Phil is congressional candidate for the 3rd District in Indiana, running as a Democrat. He will, the 3rd District, for those of you who might not know, is where Fort Wayne is located. That's the 2nd largest city in Indiana, so it's an important area of an important Midwestern state. So we welcome you to the show. It's always good to see you, Phil. Of course, we're old friends. So, and I would also like to welcome our cybersecurity expert and general security expert. That is Anthony McFarlane Gonzalez, and you all have seen him before. Tony, good to see you, and welcome today to talk about, some things that are absolutely, as the British would say, gobsmacking the events of the recent days. We still don't know exactly what's happening. Of course, on Saturday, we woke up to the news that Israel was under attack by hundreds of rockets, and also by hundreds and hundreds of Hamas invading, I don't know what you call them, troops, terrorists. I don't know how to call them. Let's just call them guerrilla warriors. And the results are horrifying, with 1,000, up to 1,000 people, Israelis, killed, and that is mostly non-combatants. There were 250 killed. There were 250 killed. I think that's Patrick coming in from the United States. Patrick Patterson. I'd like to welcome Patrick Patterson from New Hampshire. Hi, Patrick.
Good morning.
Good to see you. You'll see that Anthony is with us, and also Philip in the studio. And as I said, there are nearly 1,000 people killed. 250 killed at a rave in the desert, a dance party, which became something else, with 250 people killed, and others carried off. Scenes that we haven't seen since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, actually, but that haven't been seen in Israel for at least 45 years, 50
Yes,
years.
it
was the
years.
50th anniversary.
50 years. Yeah.
In 73.
73 war, 50 years. That's right. Thanks, fellas. And I don't know what else you can say except that it's horrifying. And in addition to all the other things that are going on close to us, we're in Warsaw, of course, close to us across the border, the encroachments of perhaps asymmetrical warriors from Belarus, from Kaliningrad. It's a very unstable situation, and it bears some calm, as we can be, calm observation. I never thought I would see the kind of stuff I saw over the weekend in Israel. We know, living in Warsaw, the history of the Holocaust. I mean, not far from where the studio is where the last stand of the Jewish ghetto was in early May of 1943. And nearby is also the place from which people were sent by train, by cattle car, if you will, boxcar.
To Treblinka.
Yes, Treblinka and other camps, throughout Poland. So for any of us who live in Warsaw, there's a constant reminder of what happened in World War II to the Jewish people, and also what the Russians, the result of Russian aggression in Poland over centuries, certainly since the time of Ivan the Terrible and the beginning of the Tsardom in Russia in around 1550, Elizabethan time, for those of you, late Renaissance, for those of you who might realize that time better by that sobriquet. Now, as we're looking at the events that are happening now, it's very hard not to look at this in its most possible serious light. There has been the idea that World War III might start in this particular part of the world, but it's been a trope for a long time, an idea for a long time, that World War III might start in the Middle East. This has been a constant theme since the end of World War II. And, well, are we seeing that now? And is this something that can be contained? I'm going to come to you, Tony, first. Patrick, we're going to talk to later and get some views from what's going on in the States right now, where he's been making speeches about Ukraine. He's made one recently at the University of New Hampshire. He's got a book coming out with the Harvard Press with his brilliant photographs. And he's been making a number of other speeches. So we're very glad to have Patrick here, too, joining us while I was giving that introduction. Tony, what's the situation?
Currently, the situation is that Israel has contained its borders now. They've actually officially made that statement. They actually have, based upon the Google and other sources that have maps of the heat maps of the activity in the area. They have contained it in Gaza. They're still trying to fight little skirmishes that are they're calling them terrorists, but really we all know that they're insurgents. That's the actual key term, insurgents from a different country or a different part of a region into a friendly or neutral country. So insurgents, that's naturally. So they're still fighting them. They still have about 200 estimated plus that they have in theater of Israel, but they are still containing that. During the first days of the movement during the first days of the assault into Israel, the United States and other allies moved fleets to the Mediterranean. They put them on high alert. They already pushed them in there. Depending on how fast they can get there, they have between 4 to 5 days, especially the Mediterranean fleet. That's not only just the naval attack fleet coming from the Mediterranean, they also have sustainment and land amphibious fleets. There's 2 of them, one in the Red Sea and then one that's coming into the Red Sea. And the Mediterranean is going to the Sinai Canal. So that's exactly where they're heading to right now as we speak. As far as the weapons loss and control that Israel had, they did lose a multitude of tanks. They lost about 14 Merkavas. And they lost a short outpost, about 2 or 3 near there in the southern border, near the Rave, believe it or not, because the major base that they had there was an air base. They actually did lose partial control of it. They actually did move F-16s and other various fighter jets out of that base. You can actually find videos of this, live videos of them moving these vehicles as fast as possible. Now, some of them were maintenance and some of them were complete. You can see some of them were missing some of the winglets. For people that don't know what winglets are, those are the attachment points, are the end points of a wing of like an F-16 I'm using for example. They can take those apart for transportation. So you can see them moving around. As far as the police station that most people saw, that was right there on the southernmost city closest to the Rave. That was actually bombed and completely and utterly destroyed because militants actually did storm it and raid. There were 20 reported police deaths upon civilians too, because they were just shooting any.
Can you identify that place? That's very interesting. That's something I hadn't heard or read. Can you just give us that story, where that city was and what the damage?
Yes, Sderot. I may be butchering the name of it, but it's near Sderot, and the southernmost city after the Sderot, which is about 20 south of the Rave, is Saram. Boys, I am butchering the name of it, but there are 2 cities that are in between the Rave. The police station is the northern one, that's Sderot, And the southern one, where the militants actually gained most access to, was it starts with an R, and I don't know the name of it to butcher it. So anybody that's Israeli, please forgive me. I am butchering the name. But the cities are the.
Hey, that's my job, usually.
Yeah, I'm not.
Stop taking my job. I'm the one who butchers the names.
Oh, dude. Yeah. No, it's difficult to pronounce some of these names. But anyways, these guys have had outposts there, but the police station was literally occupied and destroyed. Israeli Defense Forces actually had to destroy the external parts of the police station to gain control, and a lot of these substations that are in that city in Sorot had to actually come in and help them out to gain major control over back of the headquarters.
Do you think this rave was a centerpiece of the attack? I mean, did they attack there purposely, knowing it would be there, and they could get a lot of hostages and kill a lot of people?
Absolutely. That's exactly what is a target of opportunity, especially on a 50th anniversary of the last attack that the Arab nations that combined themselves during the 1973 attack of Israel, which almost pushed them to the brink of non-existence. Yeah, definitely. That's exactly planned, because they don't have that. Most of the borders in Israel are not manned. Mm-hmm. So they have soldiers that are sporadically spread apart. If you think of it, take a look at the U.S. border between Mexico. That's mostly fence line. Granted, it's a heck of a lot stronger fence line, but still, if the actions that Hamas did were to be done in Mexico, it would take a lot longer for the United States to respond. So the way that the Israelis got control of the borders, again, within 3 days, is pretty impressive. But however, they are just fence lines chain linked. They're monitored, but good luck trying to get soldiers there rapidly.
You know what it reminds me of is a bit. I was in Iraq. Now that you mention all the, you've laid that out in a very interesting and illustrative way. It reminds me of the ISIS attack toward Mosul that happened in June of 2014 when I was in Iraq, and pretty scary time, I can tell you. But in this case, they're running up against the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, and not the Iraqi army, which ran at that time, just deserted Mosul, couldn't get out fast enough. So it's a big difference in the response. Let me go to, thank you for laying that out. Let me go to Philip Goss, congressional candidate from in Indiana's 3rd District.
One thing before you go to Phil. There is one thing that is predominantly seen here, and everybody's blaming the intelligence. But the thing is that there are a lot of TTPs and habits that are very well known by Hamas and other militant groups that are actively working in Israel and in Gaza and the Palestinian-controlled territories and also West Bank. So that's not the only thing, but the other parties that are involved, and I'm probably going to be chastised on this, and I really don't care. Iran has been one of the key players in supporting Hamas activities, along with another country that's in the north that has had multiple issues with Israel, that doesn't even recognize Israel as a country. Neither does Iran, by the way. Lebanon. So this is probably a pattern of intelligence failures on Israel's part and actions, and also from its allies. So that's just the last bit.
Philip, before we come back to Patrick for the reaction, fresh reaction from the United States, and we'll talk about, we're going to talk to you more about Ukraine and implications for that war in the second half of the show with Patrick. But Philip, what are the political implications of this? How does it affect geopolitics, what's going on?
Well, it depends on how much we link the two events. And by the two events, I mean the situation in Ukraine and the situation now that has come about in Israel. It's interesting that Israel was sitting on the fence for the most part regarding the Ukraine conflict, and then Zelensky came out immediately and gave his support to Israel. Mm-hmm. I think that means Israel no longer has the privilege of sitting on the fence. And another reason why is also that when we look at who's really behind this, somewhere back in the background is Putin. Somebody had to fund this. Somebody had to supply these things. Did these things come from Wagner forces down in Africa
What about
somewhere?
from Afghanistan? I've heard some people saying some of this stuff may have come from Afghanistan. No confirmation of that, but it's an interesting idea, the equipment that was left there by the U.S.
It's possible. My question is, how did they get there? I'm assuming they
Tony
got
may have a word on
into
that.
Gaza
Yeah.
through Egypt.
Yeah.
And we do know that a couple weeks ago, Netanyahu, the Egyptian government warned Netanyahu that something was going on. And apparently...
Because they're no friends of Hamas, because they destabilize Egypt as well. Yeah.
Apparently, Netanyahu and or the Mossad elected to ignore that warning. How true is that? I don't know. But that's what the chatter has been about. The broader implications are this. If we look at the factions that are historically allied against Israel, so Hezbollah in Lebanon, not necessarily the Lebanese government, although they're certainly not friendly to Israel. Lebanon is a failed state at the end of the day. And we're looking at, of course, the Hamas and the Palestinian Authority in Gaza. We're looking at, of course, Iran. As we see these lines of demarcation drawn up, or at least the factions drawn up, with Russia clearly in Iran's camp, or Iran in the Russian camp, depending on how you wish to look at
as
it.
well.
China's an interesting case because
Some people are saying China's really there. I'm not so sure they're there the way the Russians are.
I would suggest that China is too beholden to outside supply chain forces to protect their merchant marine fleet that goes around the world.
Interesting point.
And because they import so much energy that China...
And food.
China really has no room to maneuver.
Okay.
Even though they would like to think that they do. And if they think they do, they will be cut off very shortly. Now, the question is this. At what point do we, as the U.S. Navy, which patrols the world's oceans, at what point do we no longer extend protection to Russia and their merchant marine fleet, which still enjoys protection as merchant marine fleet? That could change the nature of supply chains and could change the nature of shipping insurance. And even though these are small shocks...
That's a very interesting point.
It's a shock that affects the entire ecosystem because it's more or less in equilibrium now, but what happens when we make a small change?
Yeah, well, there's some evidence, and I've talked to Tony about this, just on phone calls, about the U.S. Navy backing off from defending the world's trade routes. Let's go to Patrick for the reaction in the Northeast. He's near Boston. What's the reaction over there to what's happening?
I think it's kind of hard to gauge right now. I think some of the things that I've noticed on the headline news here is that there are congressional members that have Palestinian flags outside of their offices, and now there are Republicans that are calling for that to be banned. I think this particular congresswoman is of Palestinian descent.
Well, you have the Squad. That group is doing this.
Correct.
I mean, Cortez is behind this as well. That whole there are four of them. One's from Somalia. I forget her name. It's on the tip of my tongue, but everybody knows who the Squad is. They can. It's these four ladies who are rather pro-Muslim. They're democratic socialists. That's who's been doing this,
correct.
right?
Yeah.
Is that correct?
It is.
What's the reaction to that?
I haven't seen a lot of conversation and dialogue coming up within my network about what's going on in Israel, aside from not supporting the actions of Hamas within Israel, and also the not supporting Israeli response in Gaza with the known civilians that are being killed there. So I think people are trying to dissect it here and understand.
Are people confused about this issue, or is it that this is anti-Semitism which is, I mean, a very loaded word, but is that what's happening?
I just think you have people trying to gather what side they stand on. I think depending on what news network you watch, you're seeing different images and you're getting different stories. People within the academic world here that I'm associated with, they're connected within Israel. They're checking on their family and friends there. But additionally, they are also, they're feeling empathy for the Palestinians that are civilians that have no control over what's going on within their territory.
Patrick, I made a film once in Israel, in Jerusalem, all over Israel. One of the sections was in Jerusalem. One of the filmings was in the actual Temple Mount. We got permission. We were in the Temple Mount. And I remember it had to do with songs. There were Christmas songs, and they were filmed in the Holy Land. It was a Christmas special, and I remember seeing one of the singers. We were filming like music videos, so you have a boom box and the person's pretending, they're singing it, and which is the way most of these things are done, and at one point a Muslim leaned out, stuck his head out, and said in English, "It's very beautiful, thank you," from the temple, because the temple is Muslim, but outside, of course, you have the wall, which is a Jewish place of reverence, and a Christian place of reverence, and then you have inside the Temple Mount, which is just a walled place where you're not generally allowed to go. So he was able just to lean out and say that. And another thing I noticed is there seems to be everybody in Gaza, not everybody, but this preponderance in Gaza is trouble, terrorism, from the PLO through to Hamas, their connections with Hezbollah, who come at it from the other side, from the Lebanese side, and the Golan Heights. But in the market in Jerusalem, you have Arab market stalls right next to the Jewish section. And everybody goes walking around and everybody's fine with each other. And there's a ton of Arabs living in Israel and getting along just fine. What is the key? What is the difference? Why can people get along as Arabs within Israel and have all the benefits of citizenship and healthcare, etc., those things, and they can't get along in Gaza? I think this continues to be the question. And in 1 minute, does anybody want to tackle that?
I think I have part of that answer.
Okay, thanks.
We saw that the Israelis had cut off all food and water and electricity, but let's see what they were really cutting off. They were cutting off, 3 or 4 hours of water and electricity per day. Mm-hmm. This has been a sticking point in Palestinian-Israeli relations for decades. And they are also, Palestinians are people without a country, without a citizenship, and they are a bit like an open-air prison.
Well, they refuse to be part of Israel, even if they were allowed.
Hold on.
I question how much choice they really have.
Tony, come in quickly, 30 seconds.
I was going to say, but we, as the United States, we don't recognize Palestine. We're one of the 165 countries that doesn't recognize Palestine. But there are other countries in the world that are about 144, I believe, that do recognize Palestine and don't recognize Israel as a country. So it depends on which eyes you look at.
Okay, that's a good point. I don't know how many countries there are in the world, but you just made me want to Google that.
230 or 40 something, isn't it?
230 or 40. Okay. Patrick, stay with us. We're going to come back and we'll talk about wider implications and ask Patrick about his recent talk he gave at the University of New Hampshire. And because Patrick's become a public speaker, a noted public speaker on the East Coast in just 2 or 3 months. Being back after over a year and some months in the middle of the war. So there we are. Listen, watch these advertisements. Buy everything because it keeps us on the air. Thank you.
Borrows lead to Poland.
Did you know that theme music was played and produced by Robert Borlewski, who's a legendary Polish
Indeed, I did know that.
musician. I believe he was a friend of yours and mine.
Indeed, he was.
Yeah, he's a good guy. So thanks to Robert for that. I don't often mention that, but legendary Polish rock musician. Okay, Robert Borlewski. Now, I want to go to another legendary, a new legend, a legend being born. That's Patrick Patterson, photographer, war photographer, who once did a death row story in Texas with me, which was equally, in many ways, harrowing. Patrick, you've been making a number of speeches recently, as I said, at the University of New Hampshire. What are you talking about, and what's the reaction of people to your photographs and your excerpts from your diaries and your story about what you've seen in the war in Ukraine?
You know, for me, it's my responsibility now is to echo the voices from Ukraine. I think right now is probably even before Israel happened this past weekend. It's probably the most important time to speak about Ukraine and what's going on there, at least within the United States. Currently, 55% of U.S. citizens want to stop funding Ukraine. So I'm speaking in front of small crowds, larger crowds, from public libraries, public forums, to museums, to universities. I think people are shocked to hear the personal narratives and to be able to put a name with a face, or names with a building that no longer exists. So while people are shocked, I think it goes back to the same thing that we saw when the narrative was about Bucha. And when it's about the people, the impact war has on human beings, empathy can happen. And it shifted for the last year, and it's been about the business of war. And so that's what I tried to make that connection, is that until that narrative shifts back to the human impact on human beings, we're going to see that number continue to grow unless people are going to throw their support in for Ukraine. I think we're seeing it now within Israel. It's something that's new, it's fresh. The images that are coming out of Israel and Gaza, those things happen every day in Ukraine, but those images aren't shown every day in Ukraine. And so these are two parallels that I think you can draw to it. And unfortunately, civilians are always the ones that suffer the most in any war.
So will you be going off to Israel now for the next war?
No, I won't. No, I think I need to, I feel a great responsibility to share the voices and narratives that were shared with me from Ukraine. And that's what I'd like to focus on. I've always said that if I go to a different land and work within that country, that I won't abandon it until I feel like it's been, until that story's been told accurately. And so my focus now is working on completing this book with the diaries, and then also continuing the public lectures. I've been contacted by Senator Shaheen's office shortly after the funding fell for Ukraine in the
Senator
new budget.
Shaheen from New Hampshire, Democrat from New Hampshire, right? Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
So I will be going to DC at some point to share these same narratives with our congressional members.
Yeah, that's excellent. What a long trip you've made to from first time in Europe, first time in a war, to just beautiful documentation of, or it's sometimes beautiful, but
poignant, certainly.
Poignant, yeah. I mean, it's really hard to describe. You'd have to see his pictures, his photographs. They really speak to you of what's happening.
Having been in Lviv a couple of times, March of 2022, I saw an awful lot that I never expected to see in my lifetime. And so I have certainly a mental image of of certain types of things, but what I did not see was active combat. And I'm fortunate that I was spared those types of experiences, I think.
Yeah, well, yeah, anybody who's been in it once has had enough. Isn't that right, Tony?
Yeah. That
Once is kind of enough. The rest of it's kind of like work. Yeah. And being careful. I mean, your friends, the photographers, also. You've got to get in touch with these, what's their names?
David Turnley and Peter Turnley.
Twin photographers.
Yeah, both in Paris now.
Who were tutored by your uncle.
Yes, in Fort Wayne.
In Fort Wayne, in high school. He was an art teacher, Philip's uncle. And that's somebody you need to be in touch with. Tell us just a little bit, before we go to Tony, to talk about the implications and whether this is World War III or not. I think Tony is the appropriate person to lead us off on that, if you don't mind, Tony. Just tell us a little bit about your book and when that might when it will be coming out or might be coming out, if you don't know exactly.
Sure. It doesn't have a release date yet, so it's in the infancy stage. So I would imagine between 8 months and 12 months.
Yeah. Okay, very good. And that's going to be, how many images will be?
I'm hoping to have 40 plates in it with it, and it'll be, each image will have a short description that will be both in English and in Ukrainian, and then the foreword will be written both in English and Ukrainian by a Ukrainian.
Okay, and these are going to be black and white photographs, right?
They will be, yep.
Yeah, okay.
What is the nature of the subject matter in a little closer detail? Yes, Ukrainian war, conflict, but are we talking about hot combat? Are we talking about refugees? All of the above?
No, it's a combination. I guess it's a narrative of the movement of refugees from early March on the border in Medica and Przemysl to individual stories of those who've experienced occupation and war crimes. And then also instead of focusing on, I guess, the so-called fighting and the battles, I really focused on what I call the artifacts of war. So I use the borscht pot that's sitting on a counter in Izum that's been left behind, still with food in it, and next to it is what used to be a sink that's been removed and stolen from Russian soldiers. So I'm focusing on images such as that, the small portrait that's been left on someone's floor in a building that's been bombed. So all my images, I'm trying to have the viewer have empathy and have a connection that they might be able to relate to. Everyone can relate to cooking in the kitchen with their family pots or seeing a photograph of a loved one in their family album. So I purposely did not want to saturate, I think, what every war has is soldiers fighting. We all know what that looks like. It's just a different place, a different time, different soldiers. I want people to look at these images, and it's a set crossway of fine art, photography, and documentary work.
Excellent explanation. Thank you for that, Patrick. Okay, let's go back to Tony, and good luck with the book, of course.
Thank you.
I'm sure it's going to be fantastic. I can't wait to get a few copies and send them around to people. Tony, what are the implications? Is this World War III that we're looking at? I mean, it's a mouthful to say. It's almost too big for my little brain to even get around. But what do you think the security implications are of the breakout of the war in Israel and how that's tied to what's already happened in Ukraine? And are they tied together?
All right, let me answer this in parts. So
effectively, is it World War I type scenario? Is it a World War I type scenario?
No, not yet.
Okay.
At least not yet. And I say not yet because there are patterns that indicate that this is much greater reach than what people are thinking is just a border skirmish. It's a lot more than that. It's a lot more complicated. Reason why I say it's a lot more complicated is because of the Saudi Arabian agreement that Israel was about to tie up with them, and the Arab countries that are there, particularly Lebanon and Palestine and Iran, did not want that to happen. They were really, really angry with Saudi Arabia for mellowing and bringing peace talks to Israel. That's one of the reasons why this breakout was there, on top of Palestine is trying to be taking back its territory or be recognized as a country by Israel, amongst other things. But that also plays a massive impact with this skirmish starting up in the Middle East, taking efforts away to end a war that is also unjust, that has started in Ukraine. So Zelensky brought this up into a message to his support to Benjamin Netanyahu, and also has been worried about the implications that this also brings over to the U.S. side of the house, because it's going to take funding away that is absolutely needed on the Ukrainian side to continue that fight to get back their country that has already been at war for a year and a half, 2 years almost.
Philip's got a question for you, I think.
Yeah, if we look at the events of the past few days in the light of it being a potentially motivated in a timeline to throw a wrench in the gears of any Saudi-Israeli accord, my question is, how similar were these talks to the Camp David Accords of the mid-'70s, where Carter brokered the peace between Sadat and, was it Begin?
Yeah.
No, they were similar.
It was Begin, yeah.
But the more similar were the talks that Clinton administered in 1994-95. I believe it was in 94, if I'm not mistaken. I may be.
Well, Carter had the Camp David agreements, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And then Clinton did a sort of revamp of that.
Because they had similar issues that they've been going on right now. I mean, like as we've said, this has been going on for 50 years plus.
Try 2,000 years plus.
Yeah. So, but the problem is that this is on a level and a time that does not need to happen, especially with a major war that's already brought in the world to an eye of the Ukraine.
How much danger is there of this spreading? And are there connections between, in the back room?
Yes, there are connections. There are connections because of Hezbollah. There are connections because of Iran. Iran has trained a lot of the Palestinian insurgency actors, and they've also trained Hezbollah. There are factors that have connected this beyond belief. Iran has also been supportive on the Russian side in the Ukrainian war, not only in drones, but in armament and personnel training.
Okay.
I mean, Hamas was in Moscow a week before this happened, visiting with Putin.
Well,
Yes,
there
sir.
you go. That's worth knowing right there. Look, the pattern to me looks like everything I'm reading, conversations, and just sort of a bit of nous from being around. Doesn't always make it true, but some empirical experience is that you have Hamas, and then Hezbollah is a sort of big brother to them. Then you have Iran, which is always stirring up trouble, is closely related to both of those. Iran is a proxy of the Kremlin, and to some extent China, but mostly the Kremlin. And Russia's interests are to have bases. That's why one of the big things about Kaliningrad is where the Baltic Fleet is located. It's a warm water port. Warm water port in the Black Sea at Crimea, and they wanted Odessa, of course, which is even better, and to control the wheat flow. And then you have also Syria, where the Russians have a naval base, and you have Cyprus, where a whole town, a city in Cyprus is controlled by the Russians, and you often see not only super yachts of the Russian elite, but also Russian naval vessels. So,
interestingly, from the list you just mentioned, Odessa seems to be at least partially liberated as a port is concerned. It seems that the Russians are incapable of preventing Ukrainian grain from exiting Odessa anymore, and the civilian ships coming in and out are doing so at will. But they are threatening to put mines in the sea lanes of the Black Sea.
Okay, but I'm talking that I didn't know that, and if I did know it, I forgot it. And it's a good point because there's been why, Phil? Because there's been this dispute about the grain coming overland through Poland, and it's been a big issue in the election here. The Polish farmers are up in arms about that, being flooded with grain from Ukraine.
And understandably so, as Romanian farmers as well have been.
Romania too. Yeah,
and they've even stopped allowing the through transit of the grain. However, because it was allowed for quite some time.
Yeah.
But as Odessa, as a port comes back online,
becomes a
it's
valve
able to
for
do
this.
grain at much larger volumes, and rail export is really inefficient.
It's
and
expensive, isn't it?
expensive, inefficient, and simply less capable, especially given the change in gauge. Now, there is a broad gauge that goes all the way in Poland, hundreds of kilometers.
You have to explain that because most people will not know that Ukraine and Russia and Belarus have a wider track than the track that's found in Europe.
The former Soviet Union all used a wider gauge of rail that was specifically engineered to make it incompatible for Western European or standard gauge rail to go into
it was a defensive measure.
It was a defensive measure. Yeah, of course, because material, which is still true today, the big heavy tanks and things are in many cases transported by rail if it's going for some distance. Now, of course, we often see those things on specialized trailers, a type of trailer called a lowboy, which can detach and bring itself down to the ground. Earth movers would use a lowboy, as would a tank or something like that.
Let me come back. Thank you for that. Let me come back to, this is a very good point, and one that you won't know unless somebody like you tells us. Yeah. Tony, why is it not World War III specifically?
World War III specifically, it's
Convince
not,
us.
because nobody on the Western side, let alone has effectively considered it's a war, a world war. It's considered Israel-Palestine war, kind of like they've already done with the Ukraine-Russia war. However, this has already put many actors, which back in World War I and World War II would have already pulled everybody in because it affects it greatly. We have the ability to pull that off now and not allow that. The United States did the same thing back then. It's a European war. Then until the United States was attacked in Pearl Harbor, that's when they were pulled in. They did the same thing in World War I.
Until the Lusitania was attacked. Yeah.
And that's when they were pulled in to World War I. When are we going to be pulled in? When is it going to be officially called that?
Well, this is the problem, isn't it?
We don't know. But
this
right
is
now,
the problem. And are we more likely, are the Western armies more likely to be pulled in Ukraine or in Israel or the Middle East?
I think that the Western army is going to be pulled more into here. There are two armies that are going to be pulled in differently. And this is based on what's been seen already. Britain is going to be pulled into Ukraine a lot further than it already has because they are continuously supporting Ukraine beyond what most people actually know. The United States has already made movements from its naval assets, possibly some ground troops because of the amphibious units that they have already pulled in, to go and aid Israel because they have undoubtedly said that they will support Israel at no matter what.
Phil.
There's a carrier group that had come to Norway a couple months ago, went down to the Mediterranean, and I believe is going through the Suez Canal now. Is that correct?
Yes, that is the group, yes.
Yeah, it's not a major carrier group, but it is a carrier group.
Well, a carrier group is still 30-odd ships, 40 ships.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's not the super carrier.
No.
Or is it?
Is it a Gerald R. Ford class?
Yep.
Oh, it is.
Gerald
Okay.
class.
Okay, that's good to know. Thanks for clearing that up. Patrick, anything you want to add to this?
Yeah, I think what my worry is, and what I've seen, and you're seeing it, you saw it in Slovakia, you're seeing it,
Hungary.
you guys know this more than I do, but in Poland,
Hungary.
Hungary.
This far-right, ultra-right movement. And with the election coming up in the United States, I think it's plausible that we're going to see a anti-Ukraine U.S. president in power. And if that happens, what are the ramifications of that? And what does that do?
Why would there be an anti-Ukraine president? Whoever would be in, or you think the Republicans are going to win and they're going to be anti-Ukraine?
No, it doesn't even matter about the Republic. It doesn't matter what party it is. It's the fact of how much money they've been putting in. That's the main cause that the United States has been having, that they're saying that we've put in too much money given to Ukraine. That's why Zelensky has been really pushing with Biden to say, hey, please don't lose the support. And Biden's like, hey, I'm sorry, my hands are caught. That's Congress and Senate, that they have the decisions on how much budget we can give you. There are presidential promises. Yes, he can do a little bit with the presidential power, but when it comes to congressional power, which is main budget, that's where the major concern is. And that's where he has had those budgetary meetings with Biden and his administration and along other allies to continue where they presume, quote unquote, may have loss of budgets to
Phil?
support.
Look,
Okay,
no
Patrick,
doubt
jump
that
in, then
shift-
Phil. What?
There's no doubt that shift has already happened. There's absolutely no reason why a U.S. senator would reach out to me as this, this nobody.
Well, you're not a
start
nobody.
sharing
You're a
this narrative,
photographer.
right?
You're a professional.
No,
who's
sure,
a war
but
reporter
what I'm-
who's got a story, evidence.
Sure, but
of
what
what's
I'm
going
saying
on.
is that there's no reason why a U.S. senator's office would reach out to me for me to start sharing this narrative in Washington and in other places.
It gives me a little bit of hope that somebody has done that.
It does give me hope, but it also shows me where we are as a country.
Yeah.
And it shows me where we are within our Senate and our Congress on aiding Ukraine. And I'm not optimistic in that area. I wish I could be, but from the conversations that I hear, and more importantly, it's the conversations that you don't hear, right? You don't hear about Ukraine that much anymore in the United States.
Yes. Okay. Philip?
Patrick, the unenviable task falls on your shoulders to be the emissary to Washington, to speak to the senators and congressional members and try to convince them that indeed the conflict is real, that indeed these are innocent civilians that were targeted, and that this is money that is well spent, because indeed that's why we have been preparing for this Cold War that Patton warned us about in 1946. So, good luck. I find it incredulous that such senators as Tuberville are blocking all military promotions, all advance. They've hamstrung the entire congressional process. And I question what his true motivations are, because this far right faction within the Republican Party has taken the entire country hostage and thereby the world. And we can't really allow that to stand.
Philip, I've got to stop you there. That was a very, very good statement. But you're just running out of time. Can I ask you, I want to ask each of you, is this the beginning of a wider connected war or not? Yes or no?
Let's hope not.
Tony?
I don't think so, but the clock says that it is.
You don't want to believe it. Okay. Patrick?
I'm just going to be the odd one out and say it is, and I'm also going to use Tony's hesitation as my my scientific evidence.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to agree with Patrick. It's 2 to 2.
I'm not saying no. I'm saying I hope not. Let it not be.
Well, we all hope not.
I fear it may be. I hope it is not.
We all hope not. Yeah.
One thing, gentlemen, to let you know that there is civil unrest in a certain region to the north here of Gdansk. That's north.
Kaliningrad. Krolevets.
Yes. And they are not reporting that in in any news anchorage, of course, because they control the propaganda. But that is also something that we need to take note.
Who's not reporting it? The Russians, you mean?
Yeah,
Nobody.
Russians and news media.
Russians aren't. But Philip sent me something about that yesterday, didn't you?
Yeah.
So he's on top of it like a good congressman should be. I want to thank you. We're over time. We've got to go. And this is not Bill Maher's show where I can do an overtime section, unfortunately. Gosh, what a good show. I learned a lot. I want to thank you all for being with us. Patrick, bless you. Good luck with the book. And talk to you soon. Patrick Patterson, war photographer from New Hampshire today. He'll be going to Washington to be talking about some of the things he saw in that war and witnessed. We are cybersecurity and security and general expert, Anthony McFarlane Gonzalez in Bydgoszcz, beautiful downtown Bydgoszcz. He's not there. He's not downtown. He's on the outskirts. But I like to say that. And we hope Congressman from the 3rd District in Indiana,
Thank you.
Philip Goss, a friend of the show. All three friends of the show. And I hope you are too. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe when you see There's a Will. You can find it on YouTube. There's a Will Richardson. Put in that in, it'll come right up. You'll have 80-some shows. And you can also find us on Facebook. There's a Will. Thanks for watching.